Good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you join us. I think we're ready to go. Today, I just want to remember that today we not only have members of our user community, but we also have other attendees that may be his first time with us. So welcome everyone. We are so happy to have you all here today. And before starting, I would like to cover a few housekeeping topics. I think we have proactively muted you for avoiding background noise, but we also invite your comments and questions. So please look at the Q&A chat box on your screen. And if you think of a question for the speaker at any point, type it in there. And I will either pose it to our speaker at that time or hold it for the discussion portion at the end of the event. And also today's webinar is being recorded. We will be able to share a link with you after the event is complete. So we welcome you to revisit the content yourself and of course also share it with your colleagues. That would be great. And for those of you who do not know me, my name is Rebecca. I am part of the DFnet team since more than a year ago, right before the pandemic started. And it is true for all of us that we work in the clinical trials field, that the COVID outbreak has changed how we all do things, but not only for us, researchers or sponsors, but in the ultimate case has been devastating for the patients, like having suspensions, trial delays, and reduced recruitments. But on the bright side, I guess it has helped, well, or forced us sometimes to accelerate technology adoption, facilitating somehow the digital transformation. But how has this shift played out in data collection? Well, I guess that percentage may vary depending on the article that we read, but there is somehow a common agreement that approximately 8 out of 10 clinical trials sponsors are adopting new technologies to keep their trials on track and collect data. But this is not only about the sponsor. Today it's also about our participants in a clinical trial, and it's via video and mobile devices the most common system that, as a participant, they are more willing to use. In DFnet, we are on a mission to help researchers move science forward, and this goes through putting the participant first. So that's why we at DFnet are thrilled to announce the partnership with eConsent to add this trust patient-centric consent solution to the market since 2019. And it's true that also the possibilities of electronic informed consent are not only a step forward for traditional clinical research, but critical also in the evolving virtual clinical trial landscape. So this is probably the main reason why we decide to incorporate eConsent as a standalone solution for those trials in need of an eConsent tool. But also on the other hand, for the DF Discover suite of product users, the eConsent solution has been rebranded to DFconsent, which is the integrated version of eConsent to our suite of products. I hope I have made myself clear. And this is an innovative, simple, patient-centered platform that provides to the participants the information they need to make an informed decision about their voluntary participation in a research study, allowing them to engage in with the system with audio, video, local languages, and assistance in real time, as well as digital signature. Also, as a note, is suitable for both desktop, tablets, or mobile devices. The process itself, the process of eConsent is simple and easy in this case, and it involves the site as the initiator of the eConsent, which is passed along to the participants who will review it, make it questions and accept it, ideally, to finalize the process in the site again, where the consent will be countersigned. But I guess that I will leave this to my colleagues, Laura Yoldersma and Donna Rivera. They will walk you through the main aspects of DFconsent And Lisa, we put the theory into practice, talking about our experience and learnings with DFconsent as an eConsent solution. And we will be finished the session today with some time for questions, so don't hesitate to whether to ask them live or in the chat portion of Zoom. So at this time, I'm going to hand the floor over to Laura and Donna. Laura and Donna, it's all yours.
Thank you, Rebecca. So I should now be sharing my screen just to confirm everyone can see DFconsent.
I can.
Yes.
Perfect. So I'm going to start off with sharing with you what DFconsent looks like from the site's perspective. So I'm going to sort of take you through what the process would be to add a volunteer to the system and then assign a consent to them. Donna will then demo the actual participant part, so you'll get to see an electronic consent form in action along with a consent process. And then we'll come back here to the site portal to finish the countersigning process and give you a little bit more of a look at what DFconsent offers as an eConsent platform. So here we are looking at DFconsent from the site's perspective. You can see my name and my role up at the top right here. So I'm in here as an eConsent admin. So similar to DFDiscover, DFconsent has various roles. So I have a very powerful role right now. Most users would have a role like a site nurse, study coordinator, an investigator, a monitor. Their role, they would see within the system exactly which tasks that they would be responsible for on their studies. Along the left-hand side are the various aspects of things that can be done within DFconsent. We're going to mostly just look at recruitment and study manager today. So the first step in actually getting a volunteer into DFconsent, starting the consent process, is adding the volunteer details. So because the system allows you to support eConsents for multiple studies, you add the volunteer first and then assign them to the study, and a volunteer could be added to multiple studies. So the first thing I'm going to do is click this little create volunteer button. I'm going to add my colleague Donna's details into here so that she can get started with the consent process. I'm going to give her a birth date that's easy to remember for demo purposes. I like to make everyone as young as possible. So you can specify, it auto calculates the age, you can specify gender, you can indicate whether the participant prefers to communicate by phone, email, or text message. I'm going to specify email in this case. There's a lot of different details you can collect as you're entering the volunteer details. Those ones that are marked with a red asterisk are the ones that are required in order to save the details. And some of these details are required for in order to allow the participant to verify their details. So you'll see when Donna goes in that she needs to provide her information to confirm that she's the person the consent is intended for without having to provide a username and password. So I'm just going to include the minimum amount of information here, but you could specify, who exactly is the one administering the consent for Donna. So I've just entered the basic information for her and I'm just going to click save. So one feature within DFconsent is the ability to identify whether you've had more than one person with the same information in the system. So I've actually added Donna previously before, and so her email address is already in the system under a different user. So she's previously been added as Donna Volunteer, but I'm going to go ahead and create her as a separate volunteer. But this is really useful because if you're using the same email address or phone number for a participant, it can flag if there's someone in the system with that contact detail already there. So I'm going to go ahead and add her as a new volunteer anyways. And so we can see she's added at the bottom of the list here. Here's Donna Rivera. So now that I have her details within the system, I can now assign her to a study. So I can do that within her called volunteer dashboard. And so I can specify the study that I want to give her consent to, the site that she's located at, and the flow. So the consent flow is basically one or more consent forms, electronic versions of consent forms within the system. So if you have, everyone has a main study consent, but you might have, say, sample storage consent form or an HIV testing consent form. And so you might have a combination of forms that need for the volunteer to complete. And so, our consent forms can be, nice, basically very text-based, similar to sort of the Word and PDF consent forms that we're all used to using paper consents, but can also include, video, audio, images to make it a really interactive experience for the participants to learn about the study and figure out what is involved in them being involved in the study. And so when developing the consent form, you can, it's not the same as just sending a PDF over to your ethics committee for them to read through what the participant will be reading. Electronically, you can actually share the electronic version of the consent with your IRB or your ethics committee for them to review it and go through it so they can see it exactly the way the participant does. So the system supports that as well. So that's just a little bit of a sidebar. I'm still adding Donna to a study. I do have an option to specify a due date so that the consent form can expire if I don't want her to be able to sign this off indefinitely. But I'm just going to leave that with no due date for now. So I'm going to click assign. And so what this does behind the scenes is it sends an email to Donna's email address inviting her to participate in the study and gives her a link to click on to go to her consent dashboard, which she'll show you in a moment. But I'm going to first sort of show you. So you can see the study and the consent flow that I've assigned to Donna. And this is where I could also assign additional study consents for this study or other studies to Donna as well. So this is just, Donna's specific information. If I click on this study here, this will take me to the list of volunteers for our DFconsent demo study. So you can see these are all the volunteers that have previously been assigned. We have, one that's pending a countersign. There's been a couple that are completed. One that's been assigned, there's one in progress, and then here's Donna with the eConsent assigned. So you can see that it's been sent to her and she has it in her inbox or on her phone in her text messages, but she hasn't yet started. And so one of the features within DFconsent is supporting paper ICFs. So even though the electronic consent form process works really well, you might have situations where you end up using paper consent for whatever reason. And so the system allows you to print the paper consent if needed, and then once that's signed off, you can upload that into the system. So this allows you to select anything from a scanned document from your computer and then upload that into the system so that the paper ICF copies, are stored in the system alongside all the electronic ones. There's a few other items in here that I'll show you. There's notes that can be added for information during the consent process. And there's also a journal, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Before I hand it over to Donna, something else I wanted to point out was that, so the way we're showing it now is I've sent her an email or say a text message if I have her mobile number, and she clicks on that link. But there's also another option within the system where we have a QR code, and so if the participant has their own device or the site has a separate device for the participant to review the consent electronically on a tablet, say, you can just scan this QR code with your camera, and that will take you directly to the consent dashboard. You can also copy the link to the clipboard and open it up within a second browser window, say, or just resend that email to the participant, say, if they haven't received it yet. So there's multiple ways for the participant to get to that consent form for them to start the process, whether the participant is completely remote, you're not at all in the same room, or if you are together at the site or another location. So I'm going to hand it over to Donna now to show what it looks like from the participant side.
Thank you, Laura. Let me go ahead and share my screen. When you're done sharing, Laura, thanks. Okay, so I received an email and I clicked the link and it brought me to this browser window. Pretty bare right now. I go ahead and enter my last name and this wonderful date of birth and submit. So just looking around, what I first see, it's DFconsent, and I see the company logo. We have the language option. Right now, we only have English available, but there could be a list of different languages here if we need it. And I have 2 documents I'll need to look at, and we'll start with the one that says Start. So I have the option to go ahead and look at a little tour to guide me through how to use the system. I'm feeling pretty confident, so I'm going to go ahead and skip that tour today, but it is available if you want to take a look. And also across the top, I have a progress bar showing me that I'm already 50% complete because this page is displayed. And I just go ahead and I start reading this information very carefully. If I'm not sure about any particular thing and I want to ask about it, I can press a flag, and that's just to kind of bookmark this page so that I can come back to it if I need to. So for right now, I feel like I've read everything here very carefully. So now I'm going to go ahead and advance to the next page, and it wants me to, verify that I've looked at the page. I can either type in, or I can draw my initials if I want, and move that along. So now the progress bar is up to 100%, and I'm on the next page. And I do have this little blinking icon though, and that's because I went ahead and flagged, right? I had a question on that previous page. So I can go back and figure out if I understand it yet, or I can go ahead and ask for some help. I can, there's various ways we could probably set this up for different situations with meetings over the internet or whatnot. But for this particular one, I think I'll just go ahead and ask a new question. It's sort of like a chat feature, and I have a question on page 1. Let me see, I can type really well, and go ahead and submit that. And I'm going to just wait for a moment. Oh, I have an answer to my question, and this satisfies my request. So I'm going to go ahead and close this and unflag so that I can go ahead and advance through the form. I'm going to re-sign it, and oh, I could have just this time I think maybe I could type it. Save that, and I'm now on the page, and let's see here. Perhaps I must resolve. Oh, this answers my question. I need to resolve my query, and I'm now ready. This button is available so that I can accept this consent form, and I am indeed the participant, and I can draw my signature. One down. Now I can view it again, or I can look at this a PDF, which I could open from here or download. And here's everything we just looked at. And if a counter signature was needed, that would be here. I also have confirmation that via email. So here's the exact document I just signed off on. I'm going to go ahead and close that and close this. Okay, so now here's the consent form, and go ahead and start this one. So we have options of various kind of media to learn about this document. It's like, okay, I have enough there. I got that. And I'm going to watch that later. Oh my, okay. Let's see. So now I want to move on. Oh, I guess I do need to watch the video. Okay, I'm going to fast forward to that. On their health. And I'm going to go to next. So here's the actual consent form. And that was just sort of like a story about what the study is. So I go ahead and I read. If I want a flag again, I could. There's a flag, bookmark flag at the top. And I'm feeling good about reading this document. So I'm going to go ahead and advance to the next page. And here's the progress bar showing me I'm 50% through. I'm going to read this page. I'm going to sign off, and it remembers my initials from the previous. So I'm going to say done. Now there's a little quiz to make sure I truly did read this document. I can check my answer. I got it right. And I'll try this one, check my answer. I got that one right. So I'm going to go ahead and advance through. And let's see. So it looks like I need to sign off here. Click or tap to sign. Has a little date and timestamp. And next. So here's the final authorization, and I need to accept here. I am the participant. And once again, I can view the PDF. I can download it from those icons as before. And that's all I have. I'm ready to stop sharing and turn that back over to Laura.
Thanks, Donna. All right, so we're back here at the site portal. And so this is basically the same screen that you saw when I left you. And so we can see Donna here at the bottom of the screen, and you can see that she's consented, but we're still looking for the investigator countersign. And we can see the PDFs of same PDF that Donna was able to see on her end with the evidence of her signature provided. And then the indicator saying the countersign is not yet done. So the consent form process isn't quite complete yet. And you can see that for both of those two consent forms that Donna signed. And we can also see that query that Donna submitted while she was reviewing the first consent form. And so that was me on the other side providing an answer. So if there's, while the participant is going through their consent process, they have questions, the site can be, on call to answer any questions. Literally on call too, they can call by phone. This would hook up with a phone number at the site for the participant to be able to discuss directly with someone. There is also a teleconsent option. So you're actually able to see it now because Donna still has a screen open, but there's an option here where you can start the teleconsent process from the site's perspective too. So the participant is able to call you and you are able to contact the participant so you could discuss anything that needs to be reviewed during the process. And so now as I'm an admin, but I'm going to pretend I'm an investigator in this situation and get ready to countersign. So I just click this link indicating the investigator countersign. At first, this looks a lot like what the participant signs off on, but I also need to provide my electronic signature. So this is my email address and my password that I need to set up specifically to sign off on the consent form. So I provide a reason for the signature. I'm just going to indicate that ICF has been reviewed, but you can also provide additional details for signing off. So in this case, it's a really simple signature for the investigator, but sometimes consent forms have additional details that the investigator or the person conducting consent need to complete to sort of document more of the consent process. And that can certainly be added into any consent form. So there could be, one section where the participant completes details and signs off, but then there's also a separate section for the investigator or the person completing the consent to complete that off. And so that gets filled out as part of the countersign process. This example is really simple. But now we can see in the PDF that my countersign has been added alongside the participant signature to the complete consent form, as well as the queries that have been added to that specific consent form during the process. So sort of everything that happens within the consent process gets documented within the PDF. This can be downloaded as well, similar with the second consent form. And something to point out, obviously the PDF can't include the video, but the PDF does include the hyperlink to watch the video. That's a YouTube link. So even if you are using more interactive elements, the PDF will include links to it, so those can still be reviewed, as well as the questions. To the quiz questions from the participant are all documented, as well as the details that Donna completed while she was going through. So some of the other features that are available, there are options to add additional attachments. If there are additional documentation that you'd like to include within the consent process for this participant, that can be added. There's a section for notes, as I mentioned earlier, where you can document additional notes about the consent process, so that however the sites are documenting the consent process, there's multiple ways of making sure that that information gets included within the system. There's also a journal section, which actually shows you, which is really handy, so you can see when the participant goes in, when they've left each section, so you can really trace their activity as they went through the consent process. And everything within the system is also audit trailed as well, so you can see all the activity that has happened. You can also download and print, of course, the signed consent form if it needs to be kept in hard copy for some reason. So another thing I wanted to show you is around the reports. So the system has several different reports. I'm just going to quickly show you one that gives you an overview of the eConsents for a specific study, say. So I'm going to look at that study and the same site that we were just demonstrating. And so here this shows a list of all of the consents that have been assigned and when that was assigned, and the investigator name and the signature, as well as the date that the participant signed off. And that could be exported to a CSV file, which you can view in Excel, so that you could review the information in more of a report format rather than only within the system. And in this case, this report only provides the participant ID, as well as their initials, their gender, their date of birth. You can select the different pieces that get included. But there are, obviously, as a site person, you have full access to the participant details, but based off the roles, based off the different reports that get access to, it can be reduced so that people might have access to the system but not have any access to unique participant information. So that's something that is also available through the reports and through various other options within the DFconsent system. So that's everything I wanted to show you for now. I will turn it back to Rebecca.
Okay, let me share my screen. And I will give the control to, or the turn to Lisa.
Hi, everyone. I just turned my camera on so you could see me. I can't really see you, but thanks for coming today. And it's really nice to have all of us together again. Okay, Rebecca, next slide. So almost to the day, 1 year ago, we had a DF Discover webinar on DF Engage, or our electronic patient-reported outcome app. And this slide is straight from that webinar. And before March of 2020, ePro was a really nice thing to maybe have. We'd like to do it. We've heard that it improves subject engagement, retention, it avoids manual data entry, better quality data, and some good real-time access. But we don't want to be the first. It sounds kind of complicated, and it's just easier to keep doing what we're doing. Next slide. Second verse, same as the first. Just replace the ePro with eConsent. It was the exact same situation. We hear it's really good, better real-time access, but we don't want to be the first. Sounds complicated. It's easier to keep doing what we're doing. Next slide, please. And of course, after March of 2020, these things became a must-have. So COVID-19 arrived and has changed our way of doing things, going forward forever. Next slide, please. I'm going to briefly describe our success story with a COVID-19 treatment study in South Africa. So the site and study development began last summer, and this was March of 2020, and there are some, as there still are, some very valid and real concerns. Does the virus transmit by paper? How long does it remain on the paper? These are COVID-19 positive participants who are coming into the clinic, so we need to have proper protocol in place. We need to keep as much social distance as possible. And some of the sites are mobile clinics, so that made it even tighter. If you're on a mobile van, how are we going to handle people and then all of this paper? And then from the monitoring side, the amount of time that monitors were going to be spending on site was going to be much less, if at all. So a lot had to be done remotely. Next slide, please. And we decided we're just going to go big and go everything E. So this was an existing organization, but a new clinical research site. And eSource was new to them. DF Discover was a new EDC platform for them. We're also using ePro with participants, and then eConsent. So lots of new things, a new site during the lockdown with very aggressive timelines. So it was a steep learning curve for all of these 4 E processes. Next slide, please. And again, why start easy? Let's go for complicated. There were our 4 sites, 4 different languages, 4 separate informed consent forms. Midway through, there was a major protocol change. So the protocol changed, all of the ICFs changed. And then even beyond that, there were different flows. As Laura was briefly showing you can choose the flow. There's a pregnancy form that would only be needed by females, for example. One of the other flows was, instead of having all of them completed at one time, like Donna did, it was kind of a stepwise approach. You had people who came in for screening and they signed the screening consent, but they might peel off and not continue on. But there are other people who, okay, now we need to activate the enrollment ICF. So I quickly counted it up. I'm sure my math might not be correct, but it was over 64 possible combinations of ICF, site, language, versions, and flows. So it's quite complicated, but the ClinConsent system handled all of this so smoothly behind the scenes. You see the orange participant who walks in, and at the end, there's the tablet that you give the participant. And all of that middle section is, other than choosing the language, is behind the scenes, and the participant doesn't have to worry about any of that. Next slide, please. So of all the E's, this was the easiest of the 4. It was the easiest adoption by the site. From the from the participant perspective, it was a requirement that the participants be literate, but perhaps not as literate or technologically savvy as the study team. So we had some worries about the participants' adoption of this new technology, especially during a very trying time in their lives. They're coming in to find out if they're COVID-19 positive. But it went very smoothly, and actually in some ways better than paper. There was this concept, this belief that the higher the technology, the greater the confidence in the research and the science. So they felt like they were part of something real and important and cutting edge. So from the participant end, it was very smooth. They handed a tablet to the participant. There was a extensive cleaning procedure between participants, but that's how they handled it for this study. From the site perspective and the monitoring perspective, the electronic trail was easier to follow than the paper trail. One of the major reasons is the participant couldn't not check a box. As you saw with Donna, she had to, if she clicked a flag, for example, she couldn't sign. If there are required check boxes, she must check all of those. You can't not sign. If initials are required, you have to add those. So it reduces those kind of issues. And it was much easier to monitor remotely. As you saw, Laura, she was on the back end. That's where the monitors go as well. They can pull up all the forms. They can see the participant signatures, the time, the ICF administrator signature, the investigator. So it's a really easy audit trail. I just wanted to also highlight, I think Laura did mention this, that if there were a power failure or internet failure, or in a case of if it's an illiterate participant, all of those possibilities, any of those, you could complete the ICF on paper, sign it, and then upload it. And just to point out, once it starts on paper, then the entire process would be on paper. So if the participant has signed the paper, then the ICF admin and the investigator would also need to sign that paper, but it all would be uploaded into the system. The site had some comments also about eco-friendliness, the idea of not having so much paper to get lost or just to mess things up. The ICF PDFs could be sent via email or WhatsApp. And I think even when Donna was doing the demo, something popped up in her email showing them the PDF. And next slide, please. And for us, this one really makes me smile. It was excellent customer service from eConsent. The site staff really appreciated how quickly they responded to any questions or concerns or changes. There was a lot of changes during the study. And Smita is our primary contact, and I think she might be on this call today, but we just really want to point out how appreciative everyone is of the customer service. Next slide, please. And looking back, what are some lessons? We all can have plenty of lessons from 2020 and COVID, but the idea of introducing the eConsent intent as early as possible in the process. So with our study, paper was intended, but then things had to switch. So, but if you can start with the intent, including it in the IRB submissions, RFIs, the manual procedures, protocol, have that in there from the get-go. There is a flow within the eConsent system where an IRB can go in and review it just as the participant does. So that's all in there. And IRBs are really taking to this overall eConsent process. There's a little bit of formatting changes that need to be done between paper and electronic ICFs. So you need to make sure that you are on top of all of that. Of course, if there are additional multiple languages, then you need to make sure that everything is correct, obviously not just on the paper, but in the electronic version. And some of the audio visual elements, as Donna was showing, those are really, really helpful. Just a reminder that those, of course, take a little bit more time and feedback to get them in there and in the proper place and the proper flow. And we've so enjoyed working with the eConsent team because we provide feedback and they continue to develop it. Some things that we realize that they're continuing to be implemented. And so the more feedback we and the site, the staff, the participants, the monitors can provide, the better the solution will be overall. And our big thing right now is the integration with our API. So we're moving ahead with that. So overall, it's been a very good experience. And next slide, please. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Time for questions. So if you think of a question, just type in at the Q&A chat box on your screen. But I've seen that we have several questions that have been submitted by the audience. So let me go to them. I'm going to stop sharing and go to the questions. So we have a couple of them from during the demo that Laura and Donna were doing. And I noticed that the signature can be typed. However, my understanding that e-signature can be classified as simple, advanced, and qualified, and for clinical trial where risk is involved. The e-signature should be made in a way that allows direct comparison with e-signature. Could you please confirm that typing a name is acceptable?
Yeah, so the ClinConsent system is 21 CFR Part 11. It is acceptable as e-signatures, which we've used in a couple of trials now. I don't know if, Lisa, you wanted to add anything to that.
Or perhaps Anil. Anil, are you on?
Yes, Lisa. Yeah, like I responded in the chart, it's Part 11 compliance and it's very much acceptable.
Great. Thank you, Anil.
And just one more thing, Rebecca, you saw, I think with Donna's demo, there was a choice of typing or drawing the name, and that choice can be there, or you can turn one or both on. And so in our study, they chose to turn off the drawing aspect, and it was only typed.
Another one is that the system notify the person that will be reviewing the consent that the volunteer participant has opened the consent and is ready to be ready for questions and calls.
Yeah, so if you're already within the assigned volunteers list, you'll see immediately as soon as the participant goes in, you'll see that it's in progress. But currently there isn't support for an email or text message to be sent to site staff when that happens. So that's a good thing to consider for the future. Thanks for questioning that, for asking about that.
There is one sent afterwards, but not before, or not when it starts.
Yeah, so there's notification when it's completed, or if the consent has been declined. There's a few different notifications, but when they open the consent isn't one of those notifications, perhaps yet.
Thanks, Laura and Lisa. So we have 3 questions in one from Kristen. How does the system handle changes to ICFs during the course of a study? For example, for a protocol amendment. Also, are there parameters to allow for reconsenting versus form versions superseding each other? And the last one is, what about translation of consent forms? Can different current versions be active for a single protocol, or for example, for different sites in a single trial?
Neil, maybe I'll start this one, and if I don't explain it fully, please step in afterwards. Kristen, I think in my my slide, I pointed out that yes, there are multiple languages can be in. Once you start in a language, then if there are multiple forms, you have to continue in that language. So that's controlled. Versioning, yes, for sure, there are version changes, and all of the behind the scenes part, that Smita and Anil and others were working on, controls all of that. So forms can be closed to, they're done. Once an approved form has been implemented, formatted, and approved, then the earlier version is closed and cannot be used. But of course, if you pull up the PDF for participants who completed prior, nothing is ever going to change on forms that have already been completed, right? So those are as they are. And there is an option to have reconsent required for everyone. So it could be a reconsent required for everyone, or in new forms going forward. And Anil, anything else you'd like to add on that?
Yeah, you said it right. So the versioning can also be controlled at site level. It's not at the study level. So each site can have its own versions.
Thanks, Neil. I don't know if you can hear me. Yeah, it sounds like my volume is coming through. But so Lisa, did I understand that the reconsenting it's applicable across all sites for a single study? So if you couldn't just reconsent by site, is that correct?
Right, right. So there are two ways to reconsent. So the reconsent can be applied at study level, which is published across all sites, or if we wish to apply the reconsent only for a particular site, one that can be controlled within the site. It doesn't have to be, published to entire sites within the study.
Okay, thank you. And then for the translations, can you also have multiple active translations at a single site and then just assign those per user, or I guess per maybe a subsite would be a better example?
Yeah, so we do have a concept called eConsent flow. So you can construct as many flows. Flow is nothing but a group of consent forms, which can be, multiple languages. So you can set one group of Spanish form into, Spanish eConsent flow, and the group into English flow. So each site can be assigned with this flow, and each other site, the other side won't be able to see each other's consent forms. So it can the sites can control the languages within its own versions.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Anil. Thanks, Christian, for the question. We have one more question. Will it be possible to use eConsent for future use of specimens and sync with virtual biobanking databases to accompany store specimens of consented participants? I don't know. I guess that this is a future use, so I don't know if Anil.
Yes, definitely. There's a very basic fundamental eConsent process that we can consider, and that's already handled within the system.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Because at least at the chat there is no more questions. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question out loud. Don't worry about typing. But in the meantime, while we wait for more questions, if any, I'm going to share again my screen because we would like to make one announcement that probably you, at least our user community, you are already aware. But it's about that we are very excited to announce our virtual DFAC meeting 2021. This is going to be a two half days DF Discover user group event that will take place on September 15 and 16 this year in 2 half-day sessions that will be full of interactive presentations, demos, and opportunities to share ideas. The format for this virtual user community meeting has changed this year, but overall the goal of this community meeting has not. So let's bring the community together, learn from one another, discover challenges, and share solutions. And I would like to thank you in advance to those of you who will participate as speakers in this DFAC event and take this opportunity. And I would like to take this opportunity to invite others to share their learnings and progress as speakers. This year, the theme will be decentralized hybrid clinical trials. And if you want to participate or you think you may have something to share with the rest of the community that may have value as a speaker, drop us a note saying, I would like to participate, and we will contact you. So more details to come, but at least save the date. There has been any question in the meantime? I wasn't checking the chat. I guess no more questions. So we still have 10 minutes, but Thank you to everyone who joined us today. The webinar will be available at our brand new website, dfnetresearch.com, by the end of the day. And if not, of course, by the end of the week. And also we will be sharing with you the recording via email and through our LinkedIn social media account. If you have any additional questions or would like to connect directly with us, please do so. You can reach us out directly using our contact information. And if there is no more questions or comments, thank you so much, Lisa, Donna, and Laura. And Laura B, that is behind the scenes, that has been helping us making this happen.